Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bits and Pieces. This is a series for Visual Studio subscribers, and I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, April Edwards, and just like you, I'm a developer and I work for GitHub. Now, as part of my job, I want to know what tools I can use to help me develop applications more effectively. Now, to set expectations in today's episode, we're briefly going to give you an overview of the monthly Azure credit and what it can be used for. Now, Visual Studio subscriptions has an Azure monthly credits, which are included if you're a paid volume licensing subscriber, or you have a retail Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, or even a professional or a test professional, and even the MSDN platform subscriptions. Now, some of the other programs or channels like NPM, MCT, MPSA, and BizSpark also have Azure credits. And kudos to you if you know exactly what those acronyms stood for, because I don't. So here's the basic breakdown of how much monthly Azure credit is included with each of those subscription types. So if you're a Visual Studio Enterprise subscriber, you're going to have $150 per month. If you're a Visual Studio Professional or Test Professional subscriber, you're going to have $50 per month. Now, if you're an MSDN's platform subscription subscriber, you're going to have $100 per month. So these credits are part of your subscription and automatically renew every single month. So you don't have to put down a credit card to get going. It's pretty easy. Now, in case you do exhaust your credit, which does happen, these services will shut off automatically, not incurring you any further charges. So if you don't know what subscription level you have or which program you have access to, you can go to the subscriptions page in your portal by visiting my.visualstudio.com/subscriptions. So to help me today, I'd like to introduce our very special guest, Javier Lozano. Hey, Javier.
Hey, April, how's it going?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to see you.
I know. Thank you so much for having me on the show. This is really exciting and can't wait to talk to you about all the awesomeness of Visual Studio subscriptions.
Me either. And, before we get started, I mean, you and I know each other like super well. We're pretty much biffles. Can you tell everyone else out there who you are and what it is you do?
Yes. Like April said, my name is Javier Lozano. I'm a Microsoft MVP, which stands for Most Valuable Professional. I spend a lot of time of giving back to the community. So in particular in the .NET space. So I'm a .NET developer, primarily in ASP.NET. I live in the middle of the US in Iowa. So I actually have an Azure data center close to my house, which is great.
That's awesome. But first and foremost, I want to thank you for being an MVP because the hard work you put into the community is
Thank you.
amazing. And I know there are tons of MVPs out there watching today. And thank each and every one of you because your contributions help make what we do at GitHub and Microsoft so much better. So thank you.
Yep.
All right. So we want to talk about Azure credits today. So
Right.
I'm going to let you get started.
Yep. So let's go take a look at the Azure portal and we can go from here. So
Okay.
for this specific situation, like this conversation is I created different resources out in the Azure portal that I kind of want to talk through and highlight as we go along. So now I have the Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. That means that I have $150
Right.
that I can reuse month to month. Now, I have barely been able to tap into those $150 because there's a lot of free resources out there within Azure that I can play with and get an understanding of how to use them.
So we can work smarter, not harder, and
Right.
leverage.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yep.
I like
Yep.
that.
I think my average Azure bill is about $55 a month. So I'm
Mhm.
barely tapping into it and I have things running out there full time. So it allows you, depending on what kind of development or kind of proof of concept things you want to do, it is a great way to get to dip your toe into the Azure services.
Awesome. Now I'm based in the UK, so they convert that $150 a month to British pound GBP. And so for those of you in other countries, they'll convert that to your local currency. So you'll see whatever the local currency is in the Azure portal, and you'll get that currency in your monthly allowance every month.
Right. And there's a way right now, I don't have it set up in the dashboard here. We just have the plain old view of the resources, but you can actually drop widgets in a dashboard and it will tell you, hey, you have this, you've consumed this many credits, or you can say, hey, you have this many credits left in your monthly. So it allows you to, if you're doing a lot of playing around with those credits, you sort of know where you're at and at the level. when you go
Awesome.
around.
So you can keep track of it. You can also put
Exactly.
spending limits, all that good stuff. So
Correct.
I want to know what kind of usage scenarios can we get into? Like, what are the most cost-effective ways to get started? And
Right.
I know you're a .NET developer. I'm more kind of like cloud native, working with serverless and all that. But let's start with some kind of cloud scenarios that we can get started with in
Yeah.
Azure.
So the scenario that works the best for both being a .NET developer or a web developer and cloud native developer is something called an app service. Okay. And the app service essentially it is a way to carve out a website out in Azure that and Azure does all the managing for you because it's platform as a service, which is great. So let me bring that up here in the portal. So I'm going to go through to the hamburger menu up here and say create resource. I'm going to look for app service. And when you look for app service, there's several things that sort of come up here. There is a app service environment, app service plan, and web app. Okay. The
Mhm.
the big thing to realize here is that even though we're talking about an app service, like here, uh, we're actually talking about an app service plan. That's the
Okay.
thing that you pay for. And the plan is great because you're literally are carving out a server of a certain size out there for you. And that's what the credits are being used for.
So paying for compute on someone else's machine.
Correct. And the nice thing about it is like you can put as many websites as you want as that compute instance that you carved out can handle. So
Awesome.
if you have 6 websites that you want to try out and have them each do different things, it's not like, oh, I have to pay for each individual one. No, you're paying for the plan, and the plan is spread out across all those instances.
Awesome.
So great. So if we go and kind of look at that, one of the things that we can do if I create an app service is pretty straightforward. So the entire portal steps you through the wizard. So you can say, I have my Visual Studio subscription here. That's the name of my subscription. I have the bits and pieces resource group, and then I can start picking and choosing the the settings that I want. For example, I can call it bits and pieces app, and it will validate that it's there. And I can select, yep, I'm going to make this a .NET 6 app or a .NET 7 app. I can pick whichever I want
Mhm.
to. And as I mentioned, I do have a data center close to me. And I'm going to pick US Central, actually Central US. There it is. And from here, this is where you can start picking and choosing the size of that app service plan. So you have the option of creating a brand new one or creating an existing one, depending on what sort of where you want to go.
Okay. And I can see you have your pricing plan has the total amount of consumption, so RAM and
Right. It
CPU.
has a yep. So if we were to click here, this is where it. And by the way, I've been using Azure for a long time. This is by far the best way of looking at the data because it just tells you specifically what you're getting, what
Mhm.
is the virtual CPUs, right? What's the memory, what's the storage, and how many instances you can scale each individual website to. And you see the price on the right,
Awesome.
which is
That
awesome.
helps.
Yep. So then you can say, hey, you know what? For my $150, I can go and believe it or not, Azure is phenomenal when it comes to cost for hosting. You can get a premium V3 PV3, which essentially has 4 gigs of memory and 250 gigabyte storage. And you
Awesome.
can go up higher depending on what kind of workloads that you foresee having
Mhm.
with your applications. But the sky's the limit. You can spend as much as you want on it. And obviously, with your credit, you will be consuming, like you said, to that specific point, and then the app service plan will stop.
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah,
Yep.
so we can build a website, host our web pages, and we could use a basic plan, we could use a simple plan, even a
Right.
premium plan that's pretty cost effective.
Yep.
Good
Yep.
stuff.
From my perspective, the Visual Studio subscription is a great way to kick the tires around with Azure, especially if you work in an enterprise that has Azure. You can
Mhm.
figure out, hey, here's how I actually configure an app service because you as a developer, right, or front end worker may not be doing that day to day. Someone in your IT back office could do it, and it's great so that you can have that conversation with them and figure out, oh, we should do X, we should do Y.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So,
And work
yeah,
together as a team. So what if
exactly.
I have a database? Because I'll be honest, a lot of my
Right.
websites have databases attached to them. How do we handle that?
That's a great question. So just like we did with that, I we can go back to create a resource and we can
Mhm.
search for SQL Database. Now, SQL Database is essentially a hosted instance of SQL Server like functionality. It's not SQL Server per se because it's totally different, right? But it's essentially a platform as a service SQL Server. And one of the things that you can do, and similar to here, I'll go ahead and I'll create a SQL database, is you can cherry pick the different type of resources that you can do. Now, this is a little bit different from this type of wizard because there's an option here where it talks about want to try SQL database for free. So there are,
Absolutely.
yeah, so there are tooltips that you can easily go through and select the different types of cores that you want. So in this screen, we can create a database just like we can with the other wizards
Mhm.
within Azure. One of the things to note here is the price is estimated at $272 per month, right? So that's more than our credit.
Yep.
But there, there's a service, there's an offer, as you can see here, where we can apply and get SQL Azure Database for free.
Awesome.
The way we are able to trigger something like this is that we have to go and change the workload environment from production to development because we're in a subscription. So we're not in an actual production Azure subscription.
Right.
So
Correct.
by switching the workload environment, now we can see that the price has significantly dropped, right? So
Much
it's
more
now
cost effective.
much more affordable, even in our
Yeah.
even with our credit. So now if we apply the offer, we can see that we now have the
Wow.
database running completely for free.
Awesome. That's a really cool trick because
Right.
databases are expensive. Storing data is expensive. So that's really, really cool. So
Right.
Javier, that's awesome. I love that.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen the discount before. I've never seen the free offer for the free database
Right.
use
In
case.
particular, since it's 32 gigabytes of data. I mean, I have production subscriptions out there that are paying for 200, uh, gigabytes and so forth, and the price goes up. So for 32 gigabytes, to kick the tires with Azure SQL database, it's amazing.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yep.
That was awesome to see Azure Web Apps with databases. That's a really huge use case.
Right.
Getting started with Azure, right? Moving applications over. We can containerize. We can do all sorts of stuff there. But I want to talk about some of the other free services.
Yes.
What are some of the other free ones that we have? I have a few that I love, but what's your favorite one?
So one of the ones that I like the most, which is ties there directly to app services, is Azure Functions.
Mhm.
Right? I'm not sure if you like Azure, if you're a fan of Azure Functions or not.
I love Azure Functions. The reason why I love Azure Functions is you can literally automate anything with an Azure function. So you can use a timer trigger, you can use an action or an event, but they also connect to legacy systems. So they're
Right.
great in serverless cloud native systems, but then they're also great connecting to maybe like an on-prem data center or a legacy monolith where you're trying to just do a thing or automate a thing. I will automate so many things with with Azure Function apps. And I believe on Azure Function apps, your first million calls to a function are free. So they're not
Correct.
entirely free, but if you're making
Right.
like a million calls a month, that's insane. So
Yep.
let's look at some use cases for Azure Functions because I think there's some good
Right.
enterprise use cases and some good fun use cases.
Yeah. So ideally, with an Azure function, it's kind of one of those settings where you can easily set it and forget it.
Mhm.
Right. So where you can say, "Hey, behind the scenes, I've received this request." For example, uploading a file. Right. So you have an API that you send the file, and you want to be able to say, "Hey, I want to be able to index this file, do change the name, do something else with it." You will then can trigger a function after the upload is done or after the file has been saved to storage per se, and it will pick it up and it will do the work at that point. It will be completely out of band from what you're doing.
So I actually used Azure Functions in a customer product
Mhm,
and it was very cost saving. So they had a very manual process happening in their organization and they need to process data. When I say data,
mhm.
images and videos. And we use the function anytime that an incoming image or video came in to
Oh,
process
sure.
that and we
Yeah.
chain them together. Then there's things like durable functions and logic apps that you can hook in.
Right.
Obviously, you can chain all these serverless things together. But the compute cost to the customer was minimal every month in a
Right.
production environment because we could chain them. But actually, I have a favorite use case for functions I think we should talk about.
Oh, you do? I think we talked about this before.
We did, and you know exactly where this is going. And this is something I haven't done in a while. But with an Azure function, you can use sentiment analysis. And you're
Right.
thinking, Okay, why do I want to know what other people are feeling and thinking? Now, first use case is if you own an organization or are trying to get
Right.
feedback off of people, especially social media, you can hook in sentiment analysis from a function that anytime someone does a thing, you get that feedback. So, for instance, I have potentially been stranded at an airport and a specific airline just left me there, and I sent an angry, formerly tweet, now X or whatever we call it, and they picked up on it and they responded.
Right.
And I love this. So I love Twitter. Well, it's still called the Twitter sentiment analysis
Right.
component, but X, Twitter, whatever. We have all these connectors that are pre-baked into function. So Twitter's one of them. So it's great if you want to use a hashtag and get the
Right.
sentiment anytime that hashtag's used. And actually, I use that on one of the engineering teams I worked on to get product feedback from that product. But it's also fun if like you send a tweet or an X or whatever we call it, and you want to get that feedback from someone, like whether people
Mhm.
liked or disliked your post. So I really like it. I'm a big fan of the sentiment analysis.
When you think about it, it kind of shows you, because sentiment analysis just is yet another Azure service, right? It's
Mhm,
part of, even though it says here Azure Cognitive Services is now Azure AI services because of recent rebranding, right?
mhm.
But it kind of shows you, like you were talking earlier, how you can stitch the different pieces together. And the
Absolutely.
nice thing about it, it's A, it's not going to break the bank.
Mhm,
B, you already have the credit, and so you can pay for those that analysis as the texts come in. And the best part about this one is that it's completely turnkey. So
yes.
you can just get it for free, create the functions. It steps you through everything, right? And it tells you specifically what you need to configure
Mhm,
and where you can get the settings from, how do you trigger it, and it literally just runs for you. And the best part about it, if you go with a consumption level, which means essentially the function only runs when it's called, rather
mhm.
than something just sitting out there and being in the background, your cost and usage just literally drops.
Yes, and it's practically free unless you hit those million calls, and that's
Right.
crazy. Now, I know there's some other free things we want to talk about, but I actually want to touch on the AI piece because AI is a hot topic right now.
It is.
What are some of the other AI features that we can use in Azure with our credit?
So that's a great question. So another some of the other features that we can use, and I'll come back to the marketplace, and I will say create a resource. If we look for Azure AI, we can see all the different things that we have out here. So we can actually, this is, and the nice thing about it is when you look at the marketplace, you can see other stuff that comes up, right? It may not be applicable to your subscription because it's an extra cost because you need to have that subscription with that vendor. For
Mhm,
example, like this generative AI for software developers. That
yeah.
might be a third party thing that you can align to and pay for. But in particular, here, anything that you can do with the Azure AI services, which is again hosted and ran by Azure,
Mhm.
you can pretty much do whatever you want. And you can pick the different types of services that you want. You can pick the different pricing tiers. You can look at what's out there. But for example, one of the cool ones that you can do is that you can do computer vision.
Ah, that's pretty
So,
cool.
and I've actually used computer vision several times where, with working with clients, where you can upload an image and you can tell computer vision, these are the type of images that I am uploading. For example, that could be a form that you want to be able to parse, and be able to know, oh, this is a form X compared to form Y. So as the images get uploaded and they get thrown into Azure storage, the computer vision can look them up and actually start sorting them and provide metadata for you completely
Ah,
out of the box.
yes, and I've used this before where we've again processed images with tags, right?
Right.
We use tags to process the metadata, and it was all done under .NET functions, actually.
Right.
This is really cool. So I love that, and I think everyone's looking how to use AI to how do we collate our data? How do we index it? How do we use it? How do we do more with it? So this
Right.
is really good. This is a really
Yep.
good usage scenario.
Yep. And another thing, like for example, here you can also do the video indexer. So if you're uploading video, so it's not just static content such as an image, right? But if you want to be able to do an upload a video and able to understand what's going on in that video and split it and get that minute out of it, the
Mhm.
AI is there to do it. And the nice thing about it is that you can scale it, right? So as you
Yeah.
saw on the other screen, you can pick what's standard and you can say, hey, I need more horsepower. So and then you can change that after you've created the service.
Awesome. Now, I've used a lot of the stuff with the serverless stuff. We talked about functions. I want to switch gears again and talk about another one of my favorite services. So you talked about Azure Web Apps. One of my favorite Azure features is Azure Static Web Apps.
Yes.
So because they're entirely free. I mean, there's a paid for tier, but it's a free tier. You can hook in your functions to it. You can hook in AI to it, actually. And it gives you a pretty good foundation to build a static web app.
Yep, it does. Yeah. The nice thing about static web apps is that that point is the sky is the limit, right? So say for example, your company or you're playing around with front end development, right?
Mhm.
Whether it be Blazor from the .NET perspective, Angular or React or whatever the content is, you can actually tell and deploy that application as it sits, right? Into the static web apps, get 100 gigabits of bandwidth. That is a
Wow.
lot of
That is a
bandwidth
lot of bandwidth.
per subscription, right? Total, especially if you're just playing around with it, right? If you have an Angular app or a Blazor app that you want to throw out there, you also get free domains attached to it, which is
Yep.
great
That's huge.
because that way you can say, hey, I have my example.com, right? Or example.net URLs that are tied directly to it. And those static web apps can call resources such as the Azure Function behind the scenes to do whatever processing you want. So all in all, you can deploy a very powerful application on the free services very
And just
quickly.
chain them all together
Yes,
effectively to
exactly.
create your
Yep.
whole workflow, which I think is awesome. Now, when you deployed your Azure web app before, you did it from the portal, which is fair.
Right.
Everyone likes to point and click a little bit,
Right.
but I want to talk about automation because I'm a big
Right.
fan of automating everything. So when you deploy an Azure static web app or even Azure web app, you have the ability to automate this after you deploy it with either GitHub and GitHub Actions,
Right.
which we'll discuss another day, but also things like Azure DevOps. And Azure
Right.
DevOps is free if you
Correct.
use up to 5 users. So you can automate all these deployments with Azure DevOps hooked into the Azure portal.
Right. And I already have I do use leverage quite a bit
Mhm.
the free offering from Azure DevOps because it allows you essentially have unlimited projects, right? Unlimited private GitHub repo. I'm sorry, Git repos,
Mhm.
right? As compared with GitHub, or like by default they're public, right? So there's
Mhm.
a little bit different there,
Yep.
and it allows you to use Azure pipelines. So you can either use the YAML pipelines that
Mhm.
you have out of the box, or you can use what it's called the classic pipelines, which is like come on a WYSIWYG, right? So you're able to
Yes.
select, click, and do those. The same thing with releases. You can do YAML based releases, or you can do classic releases, which is again, it's more of a GUI based. So in
Yes.
here, I'm just sort of showing here's some of the pipelines that I've built in the
Mhm.
past, and these are mostly GUI based ones. And they're kind of
Okay.
old, but they work, right? And the nice thing about it is that for for what I'm doing for deploying that simple app into my Azure resources, sorry, for my free Azure resources, this costs me nothing. So not only
Yeah.
do I have CI/CD for free, I also have the Azure hosting for free, which is great.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's a whole I mean, with Azure DevOps, you also have planning, you have a repo, you can put your
Right,
code in there. You don't have to pay for that. You can do also things with like test plans and your project as a whole. So
right,
that's awesome. So we could literally build out our put our we have somewhere to put our
yep,
code. We have somewhere to deploy it to with pretty much free, if not mostly free with our credit. That's awesome. I think that's a really good start for people out there. All right. So we
yep.
can let's say we have app service plans with databases. We have Azure Functions. We have Azure Static Web Apps, Azure DevOps, and a lot of the AI services. Is there anything else that we're missing that we should tell people about?
That's a good question. There's a lot of different things that you can go into. There obviously cognitive search that you can get into the AI pieces.
Mhm.
You can also get into storage. And actually, the thing that people miss about is storage. And storage
Right.
is so cheap in Azure that you don't even think about it because you just assume that's always there. It's kind of like RAM and CPU, right?
Right.
Um, but all of these different services, as you go and develop and you start playing around and kicking the tires, you will realize that, oh, I didn't know I could do X or I could do Y. And obviously, your mileage will vary depending on the type of workloads and the type of problems you're solving in your organization.
And there's a list, we will put it in the description that has a list of just all the Azure services that you have access to that
Right.
are either free or discounted. And actually, the list shows all the free services. So there's a lot of good stuff. So we talked about CI/CD, but you can throw in monitoring tools. Azure Policy actually is free as well. So you can do some
Right.
checks and balances. You could actually practice what you would do in a production environment
Yep.
for pretty much nothing. So
Yep.
Javier, this is awesome. This
Yeah.
was great to see. I love being able to see the ways we can kind of like really leverage our spending budget
Right.
because I don't want to go over that $150 a month because
Nope.
I've done that. I've
Yeah.
accidentally gone over it.
Trust me, I've had services that, out there that I'm like, oh, I'm doing a demo, I'm presenting in front of, doing my MVP duties and doing something like that, and the thing dies because, oh, I forgot that I forgot to shut off the other demo that I did the week before, and it consumed all the resources.
Yep.
So that will happen, but if it does, it just shuts off, right? So
Yes.
it's not like you're on the hook to pay the difference in the money that's there.
Awesome. Well, Javier, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And we'll see you all next time on Bits and Pieces.
Thanks, everybody.